The moment the ice sealed the route north, when the frozen river became an impassable barrier, and the blizzard descended like a white curtain across the wilderness, you understood with absolute clarity that shelter was no longer a choice, but the only thread connecting you to survival. And as the wind began to howl through the bare trees, you realized that the three souls traveling with you, Sarah, Thomas, and young Jacob, depended entirely on decisions made in the next few moments. You stand now at the edge of the frozen landscape, your breath forming clouds that vanish instantly into the bitter air. The year is 1851, and you are somewhere in the northern wilderness between Pennsylvania and Canada, following the path that many have called the Underground Railroad, though there are no rails here, only frozen earth, snow-covered forests, and the relentless cold that presses against every inch of exposed skin. Sarah moves beside you, her threadbare shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She carries Jacob, barely 7 years old, against her chest, his small face buried in the fabric to shield him from the wind. Thomas walks slightly ahead, his eyes scanning the white horizon for any sign of the safe house that should be somewhere in this vast emptiness. The four of you left the last station 3 days ago. The conductor, a Quaker farmer named William, had warned about the weather, about the ice forming on the river you would need to cross, about the late winter storms that swept down from the north with little warning. But staying meant risking capture. The slave catchers had been seen in the area, asking questions, offering rewards. Moving forward was dangerous. Remaining still was certain death, or worse. You take a slow breath, feeling the cold cut into your lungs like tiny shards of glass. The temperature has dropped steadily since dawn. What began as a manageable chill has transformed into something far more threatening. The snow began falling 2 hours ago. At first it was gentle, almost beautiful, small flakes drifting lazily from a gray sky. But the wind has picked up now, driving the snow horizontal, turning the world into a blur of white and shadow. Visibility has narrowed to perhaps 20 feet. Beyond that, everything dissolves into the storm. "We need to find cover," Thomas says, his voice barely audible over the wind. His face is drawn, his lips tinged with blue. He's been strong throughout the journey, carrying the heaviest pack, breaking trail through the deepest snow, but you can see the exhaustion settling into his features. Sarah nods, adjusting Jacob in her arms. The boy hasn't spoken in hours. He's wrapped in every spare piece of fabric the group could gather, but his small body shivers constantly despite the layers. You look around, searching for anything that might offer protection. The landscape is brutally simple. Rolling hills covered in snow, clusters of bare trees bending under the wind's assault, and the wide expanse of the frozen river behind you. The route north now completely sealed by ice, too thin to cross safely, but too thick to break through. A detail from the instructions William gave you surfaces in your memory. He spoke of waypoints, of natural formations that conductors used as landmarks. A distinctive rock outcropping shaped like a broken tooth. A cluster of 3 birch trees growing from a single root. A small cave formed by glacial movement centuries ago. You scan the white landscape more carefully. The birch trees, you remember those specifically. William said they marked the approach to a shelter, a dugout carved into a hillside by previous travelers, reinforced with timber and hidden by brush. But finding landmarks in a blizzard proves nearly impossible. Everything looks the same. Every snow-covered hill could hide the shelter you desperately need. Every cluster of trees blurs into the next. "There," Sarah says suddenly, pointing with one trembling hand. "Those trees, they're white, birch." You follow her gesture and see them, 3 pale trunks rising from the snow, their distinctive bark visible even through the storm. Your heart lifts slightly. This could be the marker. Are you certain? Thomas asks. His voice carries a note of hope that hadn't been there moments before. You move toward the trees, pushing through snow that reaches mid-calf. The wind fights you with each step, trying to push you back, trying to erase your footprints as quickly as you make them. The cold has moved beyond discomfort into something sharper, something that demands attention. As you near the birch cluster, you notice the land rising slightly to the left, a gentle slope that could easily conceal a dugout entrance. William's description comes back to you in fragments. Look for the hillside facing south. The entrance will be low, covered with brush to hide it from casual eyes. You'll need to push through what looks like dense thicket, but beyond that, safety. Sarah stumbles, catching herself against one of the birch trunks. Jacob whimpers softly, the first sound he's made in hours. "Let me take him," you offer, reaching for the boy. Sarah hesitates, then nods, transferring Jacob's weight to your arms. He's frighteningly light, his body trembling like a bird. Thomas has moved ahead, climbing the slight slope with renewed energy. You watch him disappear into what looks like dense brush, then reappear moments later, his face transformed. "It's here," he calls back. "The shelter. It's really here." The relief that washes through you is so intense, it almost feels warm. You adjust Jacob in your arms and follow Thomas up the slope, Sarah close behind. The brush is thicker than it appeared from a distance, dense tangles of dormant brambles and low-growing shrubs. But Thomas has already pushed through, creating an opening. You step through and see it. The entrance is exactly as William described, a low opening in the hillside, barely 3 feet high, framed with rough timbers. Snow has drifted against it, but the opening itself remains clear, suggesting the design allows wind to pass over rather than into the shelter. "We need to get inside," Sarah says, her voice urgent. "The storm has intensified in just the last few minutes. The wind now carries a sound like distant screaming, and the temperature continues to drop." Thomas crawls through the entrance first, disappearing into the darkness. A moment later, his voice echoes back, muffled but clear. "It's dry. There's room for all of us." You kneel at the entrance, still holding Jacob. "Go ahead," you tell Sarah. She nods and crawls through, moving with the careful urgency of someone who has learned to balance speed with caution. Then it's your turn. You lower yourself to the ground, holding Jacob carefully, and begin to crawl through the narrow entrance. The space is tight, forcing you to move on your belly, pushing Jacob ahead of you gently. The entrance tunnel is perhaps 6 feet long, angling slightly upward. As you emerge into the main chamber, darkness surrounds you completely. But the air feels different, still cold, but without the knife edge of wind. The shelter has done its primary job of blocking the storm. "Everyone inside?" Thomas's voice comes from your left. "Yes," you reply, settling Jacob down carefully. The boy clings to you for a moment before Sarah's hands find him in the darkness, pulling him close to her. You sit still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust. Gradually, the absolute darkness softens. A faint gray light filters in from the entrance tunnel, just enough to reveal basic shapes. The shelter is larger than you expected, perhaps 12 feet across and 8 feet deep, with a ceiling high enough to sit upright but not stand. The walls are earth, reinforced with timbers that create a framework against collapse. The floor is packed dirt, dry despite the snow outside. In one corner, you can make out a pile of what might be firewood. In another, some kind of container. "William said there would be supplies," Sarah says quietly. "He said the conductors keep the station stocked when they can." Thomas moves toward the corner with the container. You hear him fumbling in the darkness. Then a soft exclamation. "Blankets," he says. "2 of them, wool, I think." The word blankets carries a weight beyond its simple meaning. In this cold, with the storm raging outside, wool blankets might be the difference between surviving the night and succumbing to the relentless chill. But 2 blankets for 4 people presents an immediate calculation. You will need to share warmth, press close together, pool your body heat in the small space. There is no room for modesty or privacy in survival. Sarah understands this without words. Jacob and I will share one, she says. You 2 take the other. You nod, though she probably can't see the gesture in the dim light. Thomas brings the blankets over, and you feel the coarse wool against your fingers. The fabric is stiff from the cold, but it's thick and tightly woven. We need to get out of our wet outer layers, you say. They'll steal our heat all night if we keep them on. This is knowledge learned from careful listening during the journey. The conductor spoke often of the dangers of wet clothing in extreme cold. Moisture, from snow, from sweat, from the simple condensation of breath, becomes a silent killer, drawing heat away from the body far faster than dry fabric. You begin removing your outer coat, fingers clumsy with cold. The coat is damp from snow that melted against your body heat during the walk. Beneath it, your shirt is slightly drier but still carries moisture along the collar and cuffs. Thomas does the same, working methodically despite the shaking in his hands. Sarah helps Jacob out of his outer layers, speaking softly to the boy, keeping his spirits from breaking entirely. Once the wet layers are removed, you spread them on the far side of the shelter, hoping they might dry at least partially by morning. Then you and Thomas wrap yourselves in one blanket, while Sarah and Jacob share the other. The temperature inside the shelter is still brutally cold, but without the wind, your body heat begins to accumulate slowly beneath the wool. You press close to Thomas, back to back, sharing warmth without words. Across the small space, Sarah holds Jacob against her chest, her body curved around his small form protectively. For several minutes, no one speaks. The only sounds are breathing, slow and deliberate as each person tries to conserve energy, and the muffled howl of the storm outside. Gradually, your shivering begins to ease slightly. Not because you are warm, but because the desperate chill has backed off just enough that your body can stop fighting quite so hard. We should eat something, Thomas says quietly. Keep our strength up. You reach for the pack you carried into the shelter, feeling through its contents. The food supplies are meager: hard biscuits that William provided, a small portion of dried meat, some cornmeal that would need cooking to be edible. You distribute a biscuit to each person, breaking off a smaller piece for Jacob. The biscuit is hard as stone, requiring careful gnawing to break off pieces small enough to chew. But it provides substance, something for the body to work with, to convert into warmth and energy. As you eat slowly in the darkness, your mind turns to the broader situation. The storm outside shows no signs of easing. The wind continues its assault, and through the entrance tunnel you can see occasional bursts of snow driven by fierce gusts. You are trapped here for the duration of the storm. This is not necessarily bad. The shelter is keeping you alive, which is more than the open wilderness would offer. But it does mean your journey north has paused. Time measured not in miles covered, but in hours survived. "How long do you think the storm will last?" Sarah asks, her voice soft so as not to disturb Jacob, who has fallen into an exhausted sleep against her shoulder. "Hard to say," Thomas replies. "Could be hours, could be days. Winter storms in this country can settle in and stay." The uncertainty hangs in the cold air between you. Days trapped in this shelter would mean depleting the limited food supply, would mean more time for slave catchers to close the distance, would mean the approach of spring thaw, making river crossings even more treacherous. But these worries are abstract compared to the immediate reality of survival. Right now, the storm defines everything. Right now, staying alive through the night takes precedence over all other concerns. You shift slightly under the blanket, trying to find a position that doesn't press quite so hard against the frozen ground. The earth beneath you is unyielding, and already you can feel the cold seeping upward, trying to steal the warmth you've begun to accumulate. We should take turns staying awake, you suggest. Make sure no one's feet or hands go numb without noticing. This is another lesson from the conductors. Frostbite can creep in silently, especially during sleep when the body's awareness dims. A frozen toe might not wake you until damage is already done. Thomas agrees immediately. I'll take first watch, you rest. You want to protest, to share the burden more equally, but exhaustion pulls at you with surprising force. The accumulated stress of the journey, the constant vigilance required while moving through hostile territory, the physical demands of walking through deep snow, all of it settles on your shoulders like a physical weight. Wake me in 2 hours, you say, your eyelids already growing heavy. Thomas makes a sound of acknowledgement. You lean back against the earthen wall of the shelter, the blanket wrapped tightly around your shoulders, and Thomas's back pressed against yours for shared warmth. The position is far from comfortable, but comfort has become a luxury beyond your reach. As you drift toward sleep, your thoughts scatter across the journey that brought you to this frozen shelter. You think of the plantation you left behind, the overseer's whip, the endless days of forced labor under a burning sun that seems impossibly distant now. You think of the decision to run, whispered conversations in the quarters after dark, the careful gathering of information about routes north and sympathetic conductors. You think of the first station on the Underground Railroad, the terror of trusting strangers with your life, the overwhelming relief when those strangers proved true to their word. You think of the subsequent stations, each one a small miracle of human kindness in a world that had shown you primarily cruelty. And you think of the 3 people sharing this shelter with you. Sarah, whose husband was sold south 3 years ago, leaving her alone with Jacob. Thomas, who worked beside you in the fields for 5 years before you both decided freedom was worth the risk of death. And Jacob, 7 years old, who should be learning his letters and playing with other children, but instead has learned to walk silently through frozen forests, to trust no one except the conductors with the agreed-upon signals, to endure cold and hunger without complaint. Sleep takes you gradually, pulling you down into a darkness that is almost warm compared to the frozen world outside. When you wake, the shelter is still dark, but something has changed. Your internal sense of time suggests several hours have passed, more than the 2 you asked Thomas to wait. You shift slightly, and Thomas stirs. "You should have woken me," you say quietly. "You needed the rest," he replies, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We all did. Sarah and Jacob are still asleep." You listen and hear their breathing, slow and steady across the small space. The sound is reassuring. They are alive, they are resting, their bodies are recovering from the day's ordeal. "How's the storm?" you ask. Thomas is quiet for a moment. "I think it's easing. The wind doesn't sound quite as fierce." You focus your attention on the sounds filtering through the entrance tunnel. Thomas is right. The shrieking quality has diminished slightly. The storm is still present, still dangerous, but perhaps beginning to exhaust itself. This is good news, but it also presents a new concern. When the storm ends, you will need to make decisions. Continue north toward the next station? Try to cross the frozen river despite the risks? Wait for another conductor to find you. "We'll figure it out in the morning," Thomas says, as if reading your thoughts. "For now, we're alive and sheltered. That's enough." You settle back against the wall, wrapped in the shared blanket, and let Thomas drift toward sleep while you take your turn watching. The hours pass slowly in the darkness. You check your own extremities regularly, wiggling toes, flexing fingers, ensuring circulation continues. You listen to the breathing of your companions, alert for any change that might signal distress. The cold remains constant, a presence that never fully recedes but has been pushed back just enough by the shelter's protection. You think about the ingenious simplicity of this dugout, how it uses the earth itself as insulation, how its low entrance prevents heat from escaping while allowing fresh air to circulate, how generations of fugitives have passed through this space, each one seeking the same thing you seek: freedom, warmth, a chance to live as something other than property. Outside, the storm continues its slow fade. The wind drops from a howl to a moan, from a moan to a steady rush. Snow still falls, but the furious intensity has diminished. You shift your weight, trying to ease the stiffness settling into your joints from sitting motionless in the cold. The movement disturbs Thomas slightly, but he doesn't wake. Your thoughts turn to practical matters. When morning comes, you will need to assess the situation carefully. The storm's passage doesn't automatically make travel safe. Deep snow will make walking exhausting. The frozen river will need to be evaluated. Has the new ice made it stronger or created treacherous weak spots? Are there signs of pursuit? But these questions can wait for daylight. For now, the darkness and the shelter provide a kind of safety, a temporary pause in the relentless pressure of the journey north. You close your eyes, not sleeping but resting them, and let the hours pass in measured breathing and the slow, patient work of surviving the cold. When you open your eyes again, the faintest gray light is filtering through the entrance tunnel. Dawn is approaching, that liminal time when night releases its hold and day has not yet fully arrived. The quality of light is different, clearer, sharper. The storm has passed. Sarah wakes shortly after you notice the light. She moves carefully, trying not to disturb Jacob, who remains asleep against her shoulder. Her face in the dim light looks drawn but determined. "Morning," she whispers. "Morning," you reply. "Storm's over, I think." Thomas wakes at the sound of voices. He stretches carefully under the blanket, wincing as stiff muscles protest the movement. "What's it look like outside?" he asks. "Don't know yet," you reply. "I'll check." You extract yourself from the shared blanket, immediately feeling the cold rush in to fill the space where your body heat had accumulated. The outer layers you removed last night are stiff with frost but slightly drier. You pull on your shirt, then your coat, feeling the fabric's icy resistance. But dry cold is better than wet cold, and the garments begin to warm slightly as your body heat works against the chill. You crawl toward the entrance tunnel, moving slowly through the narrow space. As you emerge from the hillside, the world that greets you is transformed. The storm has passed, leaving behind a landscape completely remade. Snow covers everything in a thick, pristine blanket. The bare trees are laden with white, their branches bowing under the weight. The sky above is a pale blue, cloudless, beautiful in its way, but promising continued cold. You scan the horizon carefully, looking for any signs of movement, any indication of danger. The world appears empty, a frozen wilderness stretching in all directions. The only sounds are the occasional crack of an overburdened branch and the soft whisper of wind through the snow-covered landscape. The temperature feels even colder than yesterday, if that's possible. The air has a crystalline quality, each breath sharp and clear. You can see your breath forming thick clouds that hang in the still air before slowly dissipating. You crawl back into the shelter, brushing snow from your shoulders. "It's clear," you report. "Beautiful, actually, but cold, very cold." Sarah nods, understanding the implications. A clear day means visibility, which cuts both ways. You can see potential dangers from a distance, but you can also be seen. "We need to make a decision," Thomas says. "Stay here another day and wait for our feet to recover, or push on while the weather holds." It's the question you've been turning over since you woke. The shelter has served you well, keeping you alive through the storm. But it's not stocked for a long stay, and every hour here is an hour not moving toward freedom. The river, Sarah says quietly. Can we cross it now? That's the central question. The frozen river, too thin to cross safely yesterday, but sealed by the storm's cold, might now offer the route north you desperately need. I'll go look, you say. See if the ice looks solid enough. Thomas starts to protest, but you shake your head. You're stronger than me. If something happens, Sarah and Jacob need you here. I'll just scout and come right back. It's practical reasoning, and Thomas accepts it with a reluctant nod. You crawl out of the shelter again, emerging into the brilliant white landscape. The snow is deep, easily 2 feet of fresh accumulation on top of what was already there. Walking will be exhausting, each step requiring you to lift your foot high and plant it firmly. You begin making your way toward the river, following the general direction you remember from yesterday. The world is utterly silent except for the crunch of your footsteps and your own breathing. No birds call, no animals move. The cold has pressed everything into stillness. As you walk, you think about the mechanics of ice formation. The conductors taught what they could about reading frozen rivers. New ice, formed quickly in extreme cold, can be deceptively fragile, a thin crust over water that will give way with catastrophic speed. But ice that forms gradually, thickening day by day, develops the strength to support considerable weight. The question is which kind of ice the storm created. You reach the riverbank sooner than expected. The landscape, flattened and transformed by snow, had disguised the distance. You stand at the edge, looking across the frozen expanse. The river here is perhaps 60 yards wide, its surface a smooth plain of white. The ice appears thick, and yesterday's thin sections have been reinforced by the storm's brutal cold. But appearances can deceive. You carefully step onto the ice, keeping your weight distributed, ready to leap back if you feel any give. The surface holds firm. You take another step, then another, moving slowly, testing each footfall. 10 feet from shore, you stop and kneel, brushing snow away to examine the ice beneath. It's thick. You can see several inches of solid formation, cloudy white with trapped air bubbles. This is good ice, the kind that forms over time and can bear substantial weight. But one solid section doesn't guarantee the entire crossing. Rivers freeze unevenly, with current creating weak spots and eddies forming pockets of thinner ice. You stand, scanning the river's surface for telltale signs. Discoloration that might indicate thinner ice, cracks radiating from pressure points, areas where snow has melted slightly from heat rising through weak sections. The surface appears uniform, but you know better than to trust appearances completely. The safest approach would be to test the entire route, step by careful step, before bringing the others across. You continue forward, moving in a diagonal path across the river, testing as you go. The ice holds consistently, its thickness reassuring. About halfway across, you find a section where the snow has a slightly different texture, more crystalline, suggesting ice that formed and refroze. You test it carefully, and it supports your weight without issue. By the time you reach the far bank, you're reasonably confident the crossing is safe. Not certain, ice never offers certainty, but confident enough to risk it. You turn and retrace your path, moving back across the ice toward the southern shore. The exertion of walking through deep snow has warmed you slightly, blood moving more readily through your limbs. But the cold still presses in, a constant reminder of where you are and what surrounds you. When you reach the shelter, Thomas is waiting outside, his face anxious. "Well?" he asks. "I think we can cross," you say. "The ice is thick. I walked the whole way and it held fine." Relief floods his features. "That's the best news we've had in days." Sarah emerges from the shelter, having woken Jacob and prepared him for the day's travel. The boy looks pale in the morning light, but his eyes are alert. "We're crossing the river?" he asks, his voice small but steady. "We are," Sarah confirms, adjusting his wrappings to ensure no skin is exposed to the brutal cold. The four of you gather what little you brought into the shelter. The blankets are returned to the supply corner, left for the next fugitives who might need them. You take only what you carried in, following the unspoken rule of the Underground Railroad. Take nothing that isn't freely given, leave nothing that might betray those who helped you. The walk back to the river is slow, each person moving carefully through the deep snow. Jacob rides on Thomas's shoulders, conserving his small reserves of energy. Sarah walks between you and Thomas, her face set with determination. When you reach the riverbank, you pause, looking across the frozen expanse. In the clear morning light, it looks both beautiful and forbidding, a white highway to freedom or a trap waiting to close. Single file, you say, spread out. If anyone feels the ice give even slightly, call out immediately. Thomas nods and steps onto the ice first, Jacob still on his shoulders. Sarah follows at a distance of about 10 feet. You bring up the rear, your eyes scanning constantly for any sign of weakness. The crossing proceeds slowly, each person testing each step. The ice continues to hold, solid and reassuring beneath your feet. The cold air seems even sharper out here on the open river, with no trees to break the wind. Your face goes numb quickly, and you pull your collar higher, trying to protect your exposed skin. Halfway across, Jacob begins to cry, not loudly, but soft whimpers that carry clearly in the still air. The cold has penetrated even his multiple layers, and his small body has reached the limit of what it can endure. "Almost there," Thomas murmurs to him, his voice gentle. "Just a little further, brave boy." The words seem to help. Jacob's crying quiets, though his body continues to shake with cold. You're 3/4 across when you hear it, a deep groaning sound from somewhere beneath your feet. Everyone freezes. "Don't move," you say quietly. The sound comes again, a low creaking that seems to emanate from the ice itself. This is normal. Ice expands and contracts with temperature changes, producing sounds that can be alarming but are usually harmless. Usually. You wait, listening. The groaning fades. After a long moment, you say, "Slow steps, keep moving." The group resumes its careful progress. The northern bank draws closer with agonizing slowness. 20 feet, 15, 10. Then Thomas is stepping off the ice onto snow-covered ground. Sarah follows moments later. You take the final steps and feel solid earth beneath your feet again, relief flooding through you. "We made it," Sarah says, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually made it across." Thomas sets Jacob down carefully, and the boy immediately clings to his mother's leg, seeking warmth and reassurance. Sarah picks him up, holding him close. You turn and look back across the river you just crossed. On the far side, barely visible through distance and glare, the shelter that saved you sits hidden in its hillside. You send a silent thought of gratitude toward whoever built it, whoever maintains it, whoever makes survival possible for those with nothing but hope and determination. "Which way now?" Thomas asks. You pull the mental map from memory. William's instructions were detailed. Cross the river, follow the north bank east for approximately 2 miles, watch for a barn with a distinctive red door. That's the next station, the next point of safety on the long road to Canada and freedom. "East," you say, pointing along the riverbank, "maybe 2 miles." 2 miles. In deep snow, with an exhausted group, including a small child, 2 miles might take several hours. But it's a finite distance, a measurable goal, and somewhere at the end of those 2 miles, warmth and safety wait. The group begins moving east, following the river's northern bank. The walking is difficult. The snow here is just as deep as on the southern side, and the effort of lifting each foot high enough to clear the drifts quickly becomes exhausting. But there's a new energy in the group now. You've crossed the river, overcome the storm, survived the night in the frozen shelter. These small victories accumulate, building a reserve of hope that pushes back against the cold and exhaustion. The sun climbs higher in the pale sky, though its light brings no warmth. The temperature remains brutally cold, and the landscape maintains its frozen stillness. You walk in silence, conserving energy, each person focused on the simple mechanics of placing one foot in front of the other. After perhaps an hour, Thomas calls a brief rest. Everyone stops, breathing heavily from the exertion. Jacob is transferred to Sarah's back, giving Thomas's shoulders a break. You share the last of the hard biscuits, chewing slowly, making the meager food last. "How much further?" Sarah asks. You scan the horizon, trying to judge distance in a landscape where everything looks the same. Maybe another mile, possibly less. The rest period is short. Standing still allows the cold to penetrate more deeply, and everyone is eager to reach the next station. You resume walking, the river on your left providing a navigational guide. The landscape begins to change subtly. A few more trees appear, suggesting you're approaching the edge of the deep wilderness. In the distance, you can make out what might be a fence line, though snow has buried most of it. These are signs of human habitation, of civilization, of the world beyond the frozen expanse you've been navigating. Then, as you round a slight bend following the river's curve, you see it, a barn, its wood weathered gray, with a door that was once painted red but has faded to a rusty brown. It matches William's description well enough to be certain. "There," you say, pointing. The group's pace quickens despite exhaustion. The promise of shelter, of warmth, of safety pulls you forward with renewed strength. As you approach the barn, you look carefully for signs of danger. Fresh tracks in the snow, smoke from a chimney when there should be none. Any indication that this safe house has been discovered or compromised. But the snow around the barn is pristine, except for animal tracks, and no smoke rises from the attached farmhouse. You reach the barn door and knock, 3 times, pause, then twice more. The signal William taught you. For a long moment, nothing happens. Then you hear movement inside, and the door opens a crack. A face appears, belonging to an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She looks at the 4 of you for a long moment, her gaze taking in Jacob's small form, Sarah's exhausted features, the frost on your faces, and the snow clinging to your clothes. "Come in quickly," she says, opening the door wider, "before anyone sees." You usher Sarah and Jacob through first, then Thomas. You follow, stepping into the barn's dim interior. The door closes behind you with a soft thud. The barn is warmer than outside. Not warm exactly, but the bite has been taken off the cold. Several cows stand in stalls, their body heat raising the temperature by crucial degrees. Hay is piled in one corner, and simple wooden platforms suggest this barn has housed fugitives before. "I'm Ruth," the woman says. "William sent word you might be coming, though we worried when the storm hit. Come, there's a safe room in the house. We'll get you warm and fed." The safe room turns out to be a hidden space behind a false wall in Ruth's cellar. It's small but dry, with several blankets, a small stove, and supplies that look like they could sustain several people for days if necessary. Ruth works efficiently, building a fire in the stove, heating water for tea, producing food, real food, not just hard biscuits, but bread and cheese and dried apples. She asks no questions about where you came from or what you endured, focusing instead on immediate needs. Jacob falls asleep almost immediately after eating, his small body finally relaxing in the warmth. Sarah sits beside him, her own eyes heavy with exhaustion. Thomas and you take turns washing the worst of the journey's grime from your hands and faces with warm water that feels like luxury. "You'll rest here for a few days," Ruth says. "Let the weather settle, let your strength return. The next leg of the journey is still long, and you'll need to be ready for it." The next few days pass in a blur of rest and recovery. You sleep more than you have in weeks, your body finally released from the constant tension of movement and vigilance. The warmth of the safe room seeps into your bones, slowly thawing the deep cold that had settled there. Ruth provides food, simple but nourishing meals that rebuild strength gradually. She brings news from other conductors, fragments of information about routes north, about other fugitives who have passed through, about the increasing boldness of slave catchers in the region. On the third day, as you sit in the safe room warming your hands around a cup of tea, Ruth descends the cellar stairs with a purposeful look. "There's a conductor coming through tonight," she says. "A man named Samuel. He's heading north to the next station and can take you with him. It's a good opportunity. He knows the routes better than anyone, and traveling with him is safer than going on your own." You look at Sarah and Thomas. They nod their agreement. Jacob, playing with a small wooden toy Ruth provided, seems oblivious to the adult conversation, but looks healthier than he has since you started this journey. "We'll be ready," you tell Ruth. That evening, as darkness settles over the frozen landscape, Samuel arrives. He's a tall man with a quiet manner and eyes that seem to take in everything. He assesses your group with a practiced glance, noting Jacob's small size, Sarah's determination, Thomas's strength. "We leave in an hour," he says. "Dress warm. It's another cold night, but the moon is full, which means we can travel without lanterns. We'll make good time if everyone can keep the pace." The hour passes quickly. Ruth provides additional layers: scarves, mittens, an extra coat for Jacob. She presses food into your hands, enough for several meals on the road. Her kindness throughout your stay has been absolute, asking nothing in return, offering everything she can. When it's time to leave, she embraces each of you briefly. "Go safely," she says, "and when you reach Canada, when you're truly free, remember those of us who believe in your right to liberty." The words settle in your chest, warm despite the cold night air. Samuel leads you out of the barn and into the moonlit landscape. The snow reflects the moon's light, turning the world into a study in silver and shadow. Visibility is surprisingly good, though the cold remains intense. "We'll walk through the night," Samuel explains as you set out. "Reach the next station by dawn. It's about 12 miles, but we'll take a break at the halfway point." 12 miles. After what you've already endured, 12 miles seems manageable. And with Samuel guiding, with the route proven safe by his experience, the journey feels less daunting than previous legs. The group falls into a steady rhythm. Samuel sets a pace that's brisk but sustainable, and everyone matches it. Jacob rides on Thomas's back again, the boy's head resting against the man's shoulder, dozing as the miles pass beneath. The night is beautiful in its way, the moon hanging huge and bright in a clear sky, the stars scattered like ice crystals, the landscape rolling and peaceful under its white blanket. In different circumstances, it might be pleasant, but the cold never relents, and the knowledge of danger, slave catchers still searching, the constant risk of exposure, keeps everyone alert. Samuel talks quietly as you walk, sharing information about the route ahead, about the stations that remain between here and the Canadian border, about the community of conductors who make this work possible despite enormous personal risk. "How many have you guided?" you ask during one of these conversations. Samuel is quiet for a moment, calculating. "Over the years, maybe 200 souls, maybe more. I stopped counting after a while. Each person, each family is its own story. The numbers matter less than the lives. 200 people, 200 lives changed, 200 chances at freedom facilitated by this quiet man walking through the frozen night. The magnitude of it is humbling. The halfway point Samuel mentioned turns out to be another barn, this one apparently abandoned. But inside, protected from the wind, you find a cache of supplies: blankets, dried food, water that has frozen solid but can be melted. The break lasts perhaps 20 minutes, long enough to restore circulation to numb fingers and toes, to share a bit of food, to let Jacob wake enough to walk a short distance on his own small legs. Then you're moving again, the second half of the night's journey stretching ahead. The moon begins its descent toward the western horizon, and the eastern sky shows the first faint hints of the coming dawn. Samuel picks up the pace slightly. We want to be inside before full light, he explains, less chance of being seen. The final miles pass in a state that's half exhaustion, half determination. Your legs move automatically, no longer requiring conscious thought. The cold has become such a constant presence that you've almost stopped noticing it, though you know this numbness is dangerous in its own way. As the sky lightens from black to deep blue to pale gray, a homestead appears ahead. It's larger than Ruth's farm, with multiple buildings and what looks like a substantial main house. "Almost there," Samuel says, and his voice carries relief. You reach the property as the sun breaks the horizon, flooding the snowy landscape with pink and gold light. Samuel leads you directly to the main house, knocking with a specific pattern on the front door. A young couple answers, a man and woman perhaps in their 30s, their faces kind but cautious. They usher the group inside quickly, closing the door against the morning cold. "Welcome," the woman says. "I'm Elizabeth, and this is my husband, John. Samuel sent word you were coming. You must be exhausted." The warmth of the house is overwhelming after the night's journey. Your face tingles as feeling returns, and you realize just how deeply the cold had penetrated. Elizabeth and John move with practiced efficiency, clearly experienced conductors. They have a safe room already prepared. This one larger and better appointed than Ruth's cellar, with proper beds and a stove that fills the space with blessed heat. "You can rest here for several days," John explains. "The next leg is difficult, a long stretch through wilderness with no stations in between. You'll need to be strong for it." Over the next week you recover in this safe house. The rest, the warmth, the regular meals work their slow magic. Jacob begins to smile again, his natural childhood resilience asserting itself. Sarah's face loses some of its drawn tightness. Thomas regains the strength that was slowly being sapped by the journey's demands. You spend hours talking with Elizabeth and John, learning more about the network of conductors, about the careful coordination required to move people safely north, about the risks everyone takes, fugitives and helpers alike. "Why do you do this?" you ask Elizabeth one evening. "You could be prosecuted, fined, imprisoned. Your farm could be seized. Why risk everything?" Elizabeth is quiet for a moment, her hands still on the mending in her lap. "Because it's right," she says, finally. "Because no human being should be owned by another. Because if we have the ability to help and don't, what does that say about our souls?" Her husband adds, "We sleep well at night knowing we're on the right side of history. That matters more than safety or comfort." Their words stay with you, adding to the growing understanding of the vast network of conviction and courage that makes escape possible. You are not alone in this journey. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people believe in your right to freedom and work to make it real. On the 7th day at Elizabeth and John's farm, Samuel returns with news. There's a group forming for the final push to Canada, he tells you. 6 families, about 20 people total. Traveling together provides safety in numbers. You'll leave tomorrow night. Tomorrow night. After more than 2 months of travel, after crossing frozen rivers and surviving blizzards, after depending on the kindness of strangers who risk everything to help, you are within reach of the border, of true freedom. That final night in the safe house, sleep comes slowly. Your mind spins with thoughts of what lies ahead, of what you've left behind, of the uncertain future waiting in Canada. Beside you in the dim room, Sarah holds Jacob close, whispering to him about the life they'll build in freedom. Thomas lies still, but you can tell from his breathing that he's awake too, lost in his own thoughts. When Samuel arrives the next evening, he's accompanied by other conductors and the families he mentioned. The safe house suddenly fills with people, adults and children, all preparing for the final leg of the journey. It's about 40 miles to the border, Samuel explains to the assembled group. We'll travel primarily at night, using a network of small shelters along the way. The route is well established, but it's still dangerous. The slave catchers know this is a common corridor, so we need to be careful. The group sets out after full dark, a line of shadows moving through the frozen landscape. The night is cloudy, which provides cover but makes navigation more difficult. Samuel leads with absolute confidence, his familiarity with the route evident in every decision. The first night's travel takes you about 12 miles before reaching a shelter. This one a small cabin hidden deep in the woods, stocked with supplies by the conductor's network. The entire group crowds inside, body heat quickly raising the temperature to something bearable. You share the space with a family from Virginia, another from Maryland, several individuals traveling alone or in pairs. Stories are exchanged quietly, tales of escape, of near captures, of the lives left behind, and the hopes for what lies ahead. A young man named Daniel tells of being sold away from his family at age 12, of working for 15 years to save enough to buy his own freedom, only to have his master refuse the transaction. So, I took my freedom, he says simply. Took what was rightfully mine. An older woman named Grace speaks of her 7 children, all sold to different plantations over the years. I'm heading to Canada to work to save money, she explains, and one by one I'll buy them back, however long it takes. The stories accumulate, each one a testament to resilience and hope in the face of systematic cruelty. You contribute your own story, the escape with Sarah, Thomas, and Jacob, the frozen river, the shelters that saved you. The sharing creates bonds among the group. You are no longer strangers, but fellow travelers, connected by shared experience and common purpose. The journey continues over the following nights. The miles accumulate slowly but steadily. 12 miles, 24, 36. The border draws closer with each night's progress. The weather remains brutally cold, but the group develops rhythms and strategies for managing it. The children are rotated among different adults to share the burden of carrying them. Food is pooled and distributed equitably. The stronger members help the weaker, creating a community focused entirely on collective survival. On the 5th night, Samuel calls a halt earlier than usual. We're about 4 miles from the border, he announces. Tomorrow, in daylight, we'll make the final crossing. There's a bridge that marks the boundary. On the far side, freedom, true freedom, Canadian soil where no slave catcher can legally reach you. The news electrifies the group. After months or even years of travel for some, the end is in sight. That night, sleep comes harder than ever. Excitement and nervousness create a restless energy that passes through the shelter like an electric current. You lie awake, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about stepping onto Canadian soil, thinking about what life in freedom might actually mean after a lifetime of bondage. Beside you, Sarah is crying quietly, tears of relief and anticipation. Thomas has his eyes closed, but a smile plays at the corners of his mouth. Jacob, exhausted from the day's travel, sleeps soundly, unaware that tomorrow will change his life forever. Dawn comes with crystalline clarity. The sky is a brilliant blue, the air so cold it burns to breathe, but the sun shines with a brightness that seems almost celebratory. Samuel gathers the group outside the shelter. "We walk together," he says, "all 23 of us. We cross that bridge as one group, and we celebrate together on the far side." The final 4 miles are walked in daylight, a risk Samuel judges acceptable given the proximity to the border. The group moves with nervous energy, talking more freely than they have throughout the journey, the end so close now that caution loosens slightly. You crest a small rise, and there it is, the bridge. It's not impressive, just a simple wooden structure spanning a frozen creek. But a marker on the near side clearly indicates the boundary. On this side, United States. On the far side, Canada. The group pauses, taking in the sight. Some people begin to cry. Others stand in stunned silence, unable to process that the journey is truly ending. "Together," Samuel says again. He leads the group forward. You walk across the bridge slowly, each step deliberate. The wooden planks creak under the weight of 23 people, but they hold firm. You reach the midpoint, the exact boundary between nations, between slavery and freedom. And then you're across, standing on Canadian soil, free. The group erupts, tears, laughter, embraces, prayers of thanksgiving. People who were strangers a week ago hold each other and weep with shared joy. Samuel stands to the side, watching with quiet satisfaction. This is not his first crossing, not his 100th probably, but each one clearly carries meaning for him. A man appears from a nearby building, a representative of the Canadian authorities who work with the conductors to help fugitives settle in their new home. "Welcome," he says in accented English. "Welcome to Canada. You're safe here. You're free here." The words seem almost impossible to believe after so long fighting for this moment. You look at Sarah, holding Jacob tight. You look at Thomas, his face transformed by the smile spreading across it. You look at the other members of your group, each one processing this enormous change in their own way. "We made it," Sarah says, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually made it." You nod, unable to speak past the tightness in your throat. You did make it. Through frozen rivers and blizzard nights, through hunger and exhaustion, through the shelter of strangers and the guidance of conductors, you made it. The Canadian representative leads the group to a building that serves as a temporary shelter for new arrivals. Inside, warmth and food wait, along with people who will help with the next steps, finding work, locating permanent housing, building new lives in freedom. But for now, you simply stand in the warmth, letting the reality of safety and freedom sink in slowly. The journey that began in fear and desperation has ended in something that feels almost like joy, though tempered by the knowledge of all those still enslaved, still waiting for their own chance to run. That night, the group gathers in the shelter for a meal that feels like celebration. The Canadian authorities have provided better food than any of you have seen in months, and the simple act of eating without fear, without the need to ration desperately, is its own kind of freedom. Speeches are made, though no one planned them. Daniel stands and talks about hope. Grace speaks about perseverance. Thomas offers thanks to the conductors who risked everything to help strangers. When it's your turn to speak, you find words coming that you didn't know you had. "We crossed a frozen river," you say.
We survived a blizzard that could have killed us. We trusted strangers with our lives, and they proved worthy of that trust.
We have learned that freedom is not given. It's taken, step by difficult step, through frozen landscapes and dark nights. But we have also learned that we are not alone, that there are people of conscience who believe in liberty for all, that the arc of the moral universe, though long, does bend toward justice. The words are met with murmurs of agreement and support. In this room, on this night, you are all free, and that freedom, hard-won and precious, will shape everything that follows. In the days that follow, the group begins to disperse as people find work and housing. Sarah secures a position as a domestic servant with a kind family who welcome Jacob as well, promising to help Sarah educate him. Thomas finds work with a blacksmith who needs strong hands and doesn't ask difficult questions about the past. You find employment with a merchant, doing labor and learning the trade. The work is hard but paid fairly, and you sleep in a small but warm room above the shop. These are new problems: where to live, what work to do, how to build a life from nothing. But they are problems of freedom, and that makes all the difference. Months pass. Winter gives way to spring, though the Canadian spring is slower and colder than what you knew in the South. But the sight of green returning to the landscape carries a symbolism beyond the seasonal change. Life renewing itself, hope returning after a long frozen darkness. You see Sarah and Jacob regularly. The boy has grown, his face fuller, his eyes brighter. He's learning to read, acquiring knowledge that was forbidden in the life you all left behind. Sarah works hard, but with a lightness in her manner that wasn't present during the journey north. Thomas stops by the merchant shop often, usually with some excuse about needing supplies, but really just to maintain the connection forged during those desperate weeks of travel. One evening, the three of you gather at Sarah's small home with Jacob. You share a simple meal, and the conversation turns inevitably to memories of the journey. "Remember the frozen river?" Thomas asks. "I was certain we wouldn't make it across." "Remember the shelter in the hillside?" Sarah adds. "The storm howling outside while we huddled in the dark?" You nod, remembering all of it. The fear and the cold, yes, but also the kindness of conductors like Ruth and Elizabeth and John. The strength of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The proof that humanity at its best can overcome humanity at its worst. Jacob, listening to the adult conversation, asks a question that cuts to the heart of everything. "Were you scared?" he asks, "when we were running?" You consider how to answer truthfully without burdening this child with too much weight. "Yes," you say finally, "we were scared. But being scared and being brave aren't opposites. Being brave means doing what you must, even when you're afraid." Jacob thinks about this, then nods with the serious expression children sometimes adopt when processing important ideas. "I was scared too," he admits, "but Mama said we were going somewhere better, and she was right." Sarah pulls her son close, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was right," she agrees. "We're somewhere much better now." As the evening winds down and you prepare to return to your own room above the merchant's shop, you pause at the door and look back at Sarah, Thomas, and Jacob. This makeshift family, brought together by desperate circumstances, has become one of the most important connections in your life. "We should do this regularly," you suggest. "Meet, share a meal, remember where we came from, and celebrate where we are." They agree immediately, and so a tradition begins. Once a week, the four of you gather to share food and conversation, to maintain the bonds forged in the frozen wilderness. Years pass. Jacob grows into a young man, educated and ambitious, someone who will never fully understand what slavery meant, but carries the stories you all share about the journey to freedom.
He becomes a voice for justice, working with organizations that help other fugitives settle in Canada, continuing the work that saved his own life. Sarah remains strong, her resilience a quiet force. She never finds her husband, the man sold south before the escape, but she builds a good life nonetheless. She becomes known in the community as someone newly arrived fugitives can turn to for help and guidance. Thomas eventually marries, starting a family of his own. His children are born free, a fact that fills him with a joy he struggles to articulate. He names his first son Samuel, after the conductor who guided you on that final leg to the border. And you build a life of purpose, working not just for yourself, but contributing to the network that helps others escape. You cannot return south to guide people out, too recognizable, too dangerous, but you can provide resources, shelter, and support from the safety of Canadian soil. One winter evening, perhaps 10 years after your own crossing, you stand at the window watching snow fall gently on the streets of your small Canadian town. The snow no longer fills you with the dread it once did. You have warm clothing now, a heated home, security that the cold cannot penetrate your life the way it once threatened to. A knock at the door interrupts your reverie. You open it to find a young woman holding a child, her face desperate and exhausted. Behind her stands a man with the same look, and you recognize it immediately, the expression of people who have run a very long way toward freedom. "We were told to find you," the woman says, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said you would help. We crossed the border 3 hours ago. We have nothing. We need—" "Come inside," you interrupt gently. "You need warmth and food and rest. You need to know you're safe now. Come in." They step into the warmth, and you see their shoulders drop as the immediate terror begins to release its grip. You know exactly what they're feeling. Remember every sensation of those first moments of safety after the long, frozen journey. As you close the door against the cold and guide them toward the fire, you feel the circle completing itself. You were helped. Now you help others. The conductors who saved your life did so partly because others had saved theirs, or taught them, or inspired them. The chain of kindness and courage stretches back through time and will stretch forward as long as people need freedom and other people are willing to help. Over the following weeks, you help this new family settle into Canadian life, just as you were helped. You introduce them to employers who will give them fair work. You connect them with the community of free people who understand what they've endured. You watch them slowly transform from hunted fugitives into free citizens. The work is deeply satisfying in a way that ordinary labor never quite achieves. Each person helped is a victory against the system that tried to break you all. Each family settled safely is proof that freedom can triumph over bondage. The years continue to pass. The community of free people grows as more fugitives reach Canadian soil. Stories accumulate of harrowing escapes and miraculous survivals, of frozen rivers crossed and blizzards endured, of the conductors who risk everything and the families who keep running toward hope. And through it all, you remember that night in the shelter, the storm howling outside, the four of you pressed together for warmth in the darkness. You remember thinking you might not survive, might not see dawn, might not reach freedom. But you did. You all did. And that impossible journey, completed one frozen step at a time, taught you that the cruelest circumstances cannot extinguish the human drive toward liberty. Some winters are harder than others. Some years bring news of conductors captured, of fugitives returned to bondage, of the system strengthening its grip. But more often, the news is of people reaching freedom, of families reuniting, of children born into liberty rather than slavery. On the 20th anniversary of your own crossing, you gather with Sarah, Thomas, and Jacob, now a man of 27 with a family of his own, to commemorate the journey. You return to the bridge where you crossed into Canada, standing on the spot where bondage ended and freedom began. The bridge looks the same, weathered but sturdy. The creek below still freezes in winter, still thaws in spring. The marker still indicates the boundary between nations, between different legal realities, between past and future. "I think about it often," Sarah says quietly. "That winter, how close we came to not making it." "We made it because we had each other," Thomas adds. "No one survives alone." You nod, understanding that this truth extends far beyond the four of you. The entire network of the Underground Railroad functioned because people understood that survival requires community, requires cooperation, requires people willing to put others' welfare ahead of their own safety. Jacob's children play nearby, chasing each other through the snow without fear or constraint. Their laughter carries clearly in the cold air, and you think about how different their lives are from what yours was at their age. They will never know bondage, will never be property, will grow up free to pursue their own destinies. This is what the frozen journey was for, not just to save 4 lives, but to break the chain, to ensure that future generations would inherit freedom rather than enslavement. As the sun begins to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, you say a silent prayer of gratitude. For the shelters that protected you, for the conductors who guided you, for the strength that carried you through the frozen wilderness, for the companions who walked beside you, for the freedom waiting on the far side of fear. The cold presses in as darkness approaches, but it's a familiar cold now. No longer an enemy now, but simply a feature of the landscape you've learned to navigate. You pull your coat closer and turn back toward town, toward warmth and light and the life you've built in freedom. Behind you, the bridge stands as it has for decades, a simple structure marking a profound boundary. Ahead of you, the future unfolds with all its uncertainty and promise. And within you, the memory of that frozen journey remains vivid. The blizzard that sealed your route, the shelter that saved you, the river you crossed, the faith that sustained you, the freedom you claimed. That story, your story, joins the countless others in the long history of people fighting for liberty. It adds to the record, proving that the human spirit, when properly motivated and supported, can overcome even the cruelest systems and the harshest conditions. As you walk back through the quiet streets of your Canadian town, snow crunching beneath your boots, you carry that knowledge like warmth against the cold. If you found meaning in this story of survival and freedom, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things in impossible circumstances, please subscribe to our channel for more contemplative journeys through history's quiet heroes. These are tales of resilience, of the slow and steady work of survival, of the networks of courage that made freedom possible. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for more stories about the patient strength of those who refused to accept bondage, who walked through frozen landscapes toward liberty, who proved that hope and determination can overcome even the most brutal circumstances. Thank you for listening, and may we always remember those who came before us, their suffering, their courage, and their triumph.